Right, just a couple more seconds and then we should be live then, Chair.
Are we live now, Kirsty? Okay, let's go. Welcome to the Calderdale Flood Recovery and Resilience Programme Board. And I think everybody we were expecting is now here. I'm Councillor Jane Scallion and I'm chairing this session in the absence of Councillor Tim Swift. I'm going to, folks, with your permission, I'm going to actually deal with the first 3 items on the agenda, the bits of formal business. And then, given the circumstances, I thought it was absolutely the right thing to do in terms of just having a verbal update in terms of the recent events, because I think it's important that we capture these things as we go along and share our understanding of what's happening. So if I could just deal with items 1 to 3 first. Substitutes nominated for this meeting and apologies for absence. Kirsty.
No substitutes have been nominated, Chair, but apologies have been received from Councillor Tim Swift and also Richard Hellings from Network.
Right. Thank you. Members' interest. Any members of the committee have any interest that they wish to declare? I do. Is there anybody else? No. Well, can I declare my usual interest in the Hebdenbridge Fass and the Errington Hills, Errington Hillside Fass, because I live near there and would be affected by the improvements, but the same as lots of other people. So I do intend to stay in the meeting and take part in the debate. Councillor Patient, was that a wave or were you indicating you wish to declare an interest?
Yeah. Thank you, Chair. Just to declare a similar interest, really, of someone affected by the Mythe and Ride Fass and an EA registered flood warden. Thank you, Chair.
Okay. Third item on the agenda is the usual one about admission of the public, and it's not recommended that the public are excluded from any part of consideration of items on this agenda. Okay, so before we go on to item 4, I wonder if perhaps we could just have an update. I'd like to ask Adrian Gill to lead us off on this. I don't know who you might want to bring in relation to this, but Adrian, I wonder if you could give us a bit of update on the recent events in relation to flooding and possible flooding.
Yes. Yep, certainly, Chair. Thank you, and good morning, everybody. So we have certainly seen in the last week or so some interesting weather. A couple of weeks ago, large parts of the area saw some significant snowfall, and that combined with seasonal wet weather, for anyone who's been out and about, I'm sure will know that the catchments are very, very wet. Then last week, we saw prolonged rainfall associated with Storm Christoph, and that arrived sort of late Monday the 18th, right through till Thursday the 21st. We saw some quite significant rainfall totals over that week, but thankfully, particularly for the upper catchments, the intensity of that rainfall was much less. So by way of example, Storm Ciara, we saw 77 millimetres in Calderdale over 24 hours and 108 millimetres. No, I beg your pardon, got this the wrong way around. Last week, sorry, we saw 77 millimetres in 24 hours and 108 millimetres in 48 hours. By way of comparison, we saw similar totals for Storm Ciara, but actually got that rainfall in 18 hours. So we had 108 millimetres in 18 hours as opposed to 48 hours. And the upper Calder is particularly sensitive to the intensity of rainfall. And despite it coming very close in places and seeing some disruption, we certainly didn't see widespread flooding. And that is really the case for the rest of Yorkshire as well. We had flood alerts and flood warnings out right across Yorkshire and on many of our catchments, We were watching those river levels very closely. We saw high river levels on the Don, particularly through Doncaster, high river levels on the Ouse through York and on the Foss, and very high levels on the Derwent. But as far as widespread flooding has gone, I guess we would describe that as a near miss, albeit that we know that there are some incidents of flooding, and for everyone who's been affected, clearly extremely distressing time. But I will leave it there, Chair, because I'm sure that others who will wish to comment.
Robin and officer team, is there anything you want to add to that in terms of the council's responses and preparations? I see that Derek is on the call. It's been a busy time for all of us.
Yeah. Thank you, Chair. Yeah, just to add to what Adrian said, just a huge thanks to both members from the council and officers for the community leadership and prompt response that was done in clearly very challenging circumstances at the moment, as we have national restrictions in place due to the pandemic. So huge thank you to that. There was, I think, very strong communication. I think the wardens, and Katie's here, partners, all kind of stepped up very rapidly. And I think that the difference at this particular moment was where we did see a level of threat, I think, that was serious, and we did anticipate a risk as great as last year, at the very least, if not potentially worse, where really, as Adrian said, the length of time it took rather than the quantum of rainfall was what prevented that situation. Is a level of response that was excellent. Just a couple of elements of this, which partly also in West Yorkshire, LRF chair, my LRF chair for West Yorkshire, is that we did a virtual, first of all, have the virtual hub arrangement, which I think was important, and we tested that. Secondly, we had the ability to mobilize a level of hotel and emergency accommodation very rapidly, and I just say that was to a level where potentially we were looking to offer and support other areas that were potentially at risk. So it's a real credit to some of our hotel providers who were ready to step up at short notice. We also, in Granville's on the line, I'm sure will come in, I had very strong engagement from Yorkshire Water, to the point where the Chief Executive briefed me at West Yorkshire level about this and the actions around the reservoir, which I have to say were very challenged by the fact that we were seeing snow melt coming into the reservoirs at a really high level, as we were seeing the weather coming to us. So it was a very, very challenging situation for Yorkshire Water to handle. So I think there's been some really good learning around that. Just something from a national perspective, feeding that fed back in the MHCLG are actually working on, is that there is some distinct guidance for local authorities in particular about whether people can go to friends and family, and whether some of the restrictions in place can be effectively that there's an exemption, and there was very different interpretation from local authorities across the north in what that meant. So that guidance is being revised to be clearer, given that unfortunately the risk hasn't clearly left us in the next few weeks and months. So just to say to you, if we have a further threat, I think there will be a much clearer messaging that we can give, a much clearer guidance to those who may have to evacuate to family and friends, and the ability to do that safely. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Can I add my thanks in terms of the flood wardens? You know, what a fantastic service they did. And actually, around my way, they were knocking on doors and just checking people had implemented their flood plans. I had implemented my flood plan and moved stuff up to the first floor, which is a good workout. Saves. Luckily, the gyms are closed, so you can move all your stuff up to the first floor and then move it down again. I know that places like Stubbing Home that were particularly vulnerable, the flood wardens were going round and doing individual visits to potentially affected residents. Our sympathies, I think, as this committee go out to people in the Northwest, in Cumbria, in Greater Manchester, particularly around Didsbury and Bollington, actually, who did suffer. And you know, our sympathies really do go out to them. I think it was a useful practice run in some ways. People have said to me, oh, you were very lucky. And actually, yes, we were lucky in the weather, but actually the levels of preparation that the council did were just extraordinary, really. We were as prepared as we could be, and I think the flood wardens will testify to that, that people were very alert. I do slightly wonder, and it's something to ponder really for the wardens, the community safety people, the wardens, our partners in police and fire and so on, is that if we are in for a difficult time over the next few weeks, then we do have to guard against people becoming complacent about flood alerts, really, if they're frequent and then there isn't an event. And we have to just work on our communications to make sure that people do understand it really is worth implementing their own personal flood plans. It was a particular issue in terms of sort of small retail in places like Tormorton and Hebdenbridge, because often shop owners had been away from shops and hadn't necessarily put their flood defences up, but they really do understand that now, with a lot of work with those property owners. And I should also mention that the Private Landlords Association in Calderdale also offered short-term accommodation where possible, and also to help in terms of people who were in private rented accommodation manage flood. So thank you to them. Okay, if we could go on then, folks, to the next item on the agenda, which is the minutes to be approved.
Chair, sorry, I think some people want to come in.
Right,
I think there's Granville, Granville, Councillor Patient, and Katie, I think.
Thank you. I missed all of them. And Stephen. Granville, Scott, Katie.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, I just thought off the back of the update, you know, I know that the reservoirs issue is one that is very kind of close to the board's interest and the council members and of course the community at large. So just thought just worth to elaborate slightly on the update that Robin's just given in terms of the reservoir specifically. As the board will know, we are in our third trial drawdown of the reservoirs above Hebdenbridge, the 6 above Hebdenbridge, for the period 1st of December through 31st of March, to try and draw those reservoirs down by about 10%. I think, as both Adrian and Robin have alluded to, you know, catchments are very wet and it has been challenging this year to get that drawdown in place. Nevertheless, by about the 8th of January, we'd actually slightly exceeded the 10% target drawdown. But then, as both Adrian and Robin have said, we had a snowfall and thaw event over the weekend of 8th, 9th of January, and then again another snowfall followed by rapid thaw the following weekend, when the amber warnings for Storm Christoph were also being issued. And those snowfall and thaw events, the water resulting from those, you know, rapidly left those saturated catchments and effectively filled up the storage that we had within the reservoirs at that point in time. So such that when we did actually enter the period of Storm Christoph, there was little to no storage left within those reservoirs. Although, you know, I think I would remind the board, you know, still that even when they're full, those reservoirs do help to slow the peak flows off the catchments, even if in this particular event those peak flows were perhaps not as great as originally feared. So that's really just a bit more context, I suppose, in terms of where we were with the reservoirs over the period of the winter trial and leading into Storm Christoph.
Thank you, Granville. Councillor Patient.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, I guess just to reflect, really, I think there's a few things. I think we were somewhat lucky in terms of the amount of rainfall we got, which was clearly more than last year, last February, but over a longer period of time. So the impact of that wasn't quite as bad. But I know thanks have gone out to the voluntary sector, and it's well deserved as usual. I think the Flood Warden Network worked well, and I think we're learning lessons all the time. But I really want to go on record and really thank Derek and John Beecroft Mitchell, especially, as well as many others. I think what's happened in this last year, one part of it, which is incredible, is we all really know how to use tech now. We're fully signed on. We're all Zoom warriors, and actually, what that's done in terms of transforming our emergency response has been massive. I think, you know, John was running sort of twice daily, all area, including the voluntary sector emergency response things, in terms of what was coming up, what had happened, what we were expecting to come. and that worked so well. It really sort of transformed our response, and I think how all the preparation in getting to that point, and where we're at now in terms of individuals and our sort of ability to use that tech has really sort of transformed it. So obviously we've learned lessons over the last 8 years and various flood events and near misses, but I think what we've learned in terms of technology and access to that has helped transform it as well. And I know Katie will definitely agree with that.
Thank you. Katie, you're next on my list.
Thank you. Yeah, Scott's covered quite a lot of that. Yeah, from a flood warden perspective, we being involved in the emergency planning meetings twice a day was valuable. Thank you, Derek, and the whole team there at Calderdale were incredibly responsive, but also as being able to have that direct information from the Met Office and other partners in there, and the police as well were really helpful, particularly in Ludden for the wardens there. It was really valuable having that direct communication and being able to disseminate that through the flood warden groups really quickly as well, because we had it straight away. We weren't waiting on any information, so it was really great. The other bits of feedback coming back from the community, but also from wardens, was the good comms, which was great. People were up to date. It has been mentioned there was a slight lag between the flood alert coming out and comms coming out. I was in the midst of it, so I haven't checked that to see whether there was a lag, but I certainly felt that there was a lot of comms going on before the alert anyway. But that just a point to mention. The drain unblocking came through loud and clear over social media. That was absolutely fantastic, and the Todmorden flood warden sort of initiated that across in their area, asking people to alert you as the council to those particular drains that were going to be an issue, and the gully wagons were out in force, and that's really reassuring for the community, because that is one of the big things that they are concerned about. And then with the virtual hubs, which is obviously was working fantastically and would have kicked into action, and Robin had mentioned as well about the hotels. There were lots of questions around the virtual hubs when it came out on the comms as to what it actually meant for people that weren't accessing online, which is important to mention. So people didn't know about it, and I mentioned on one of the emergency planning calls for Hebdenbridge that maybe something in the hubs at the door, just to tell people what they need to do before they actually try and come into the hub, because especially in Hebdenbridge, to try and access it quite early before an event has actually happened. So having some offline comms on the door, or some way of letting people know offline what's going to actually happen if something happens during COVID, because I think the virtual scenario is going to be in place for a long time. Then the river level forecasting was quite problematic for us as the event was actually coming to a close, which caused a bit of hysteria for a brief moment, for about half an hour I can't remember if it was a Wednesday night or a Thursday night. And some of the wardens are actually in direct contact with the flood digital team, so we're doing some beta testing for them. So we had direct contact with one of the guys there, and we just said, is this real, for goodness sake, what's going on? And it was rectified really soon after, and I know that the council were involved in knowing that as well. But that river level forecasting is obviously going to be valuable in time, but I think at the moment it's causing upset, and I think that is my feedback back to the digital team was that, and I just wanted Adrian as partner here from the Environment Agency to understand the challenges around that forecasting, and that if we want to use it as a resource for the community, and not just for us as well, and also for the council to use it as a valuable resource, we need to trust in it. And at the moment we're looking at it and having to say to people that may not be the level that it gets to, especially when it's absolutely vertical and you're having a heart attack. So that's that point there. We're still getting a lot of sandbag stuff. I don't feel like it's as much as February. It's certainly, we've had a drop, but we're still seeing people as reliant on that conversation as a where are my sandbags conversation. And I know comms has happened around that, and I just think that's another reinforcement around the community, these sandbags, and getting them onto some alternative methods and not automatically thinking that that's the answer for them, and that they can collect them wherever there is a flood hub. Yeah, I think that's probably covered. I've probably spoken enough, but yeah, thank you very much.
Thank you, Katie. And I would absolutely endorse the point about some of the forecasting, which gave several people kind of possibility of heart attacks, really, particularly the Wolfson one, which was apocalyptic, really, in terms of what it was saying. But that did get corrected. So, Stephen, you wanted to come in.
Yeah, actually, Scott covered most of the points I was going to make, and I totally agree with what he said, especially the way that we've learnt over the years and really taking heed of what's happening. And I think that's led by Derek and all our partners working together very closely, which is having an advantageous effect for the whole of the citizens we have who were affected by this horrible flooding. One thing I would say, though, is that I noticed on one of the TV news bulletins which I was watching, they were showing a lot of the properties. I think it was in Hebdenbridge, and some of the premises didn't have the simple sort of flood barriers up in front of the doors, which I thought was quite unbelievable. I know it wasn't raining heavy at that time, and there was no flooding there, so it could have been removed, but are there still sort of grants available for people to access, to help them get the flooding? Because to me that was just a simple, basic measure which would help protect their properties. And I know at the time when it first happened, nobody was really interested in them, but I thought it had grown and more people were. But it's so it's just that question, is our grants available still available for them, and do we go around to try and encourage them to have correct measures? Thank you.
Thank you, Stephen. One of the officers want to pick that up, and it's a very important point, and one we've come back to again and again, really, particularly where the occupant of the retail unit or the restaurant or whatever is renting privately, and the landowner hasn't necessarily taken up the grants and the opportunities that there are. One of the officers want to come back on that?
I think Katie's put her hand up, Chair. Well, I was just going to say, I think the current scheme, Katie's raised her hand, but the current scheme that was in place isn't still operational anymore, but there is potentially other sources. But I think the issue is less about the grants being available. It's the task of trying to ensure that all those properties do mobilise, and that clearly not all of those properties are occupied. And I know that some of Derek's team and wardens were actually around. And I think the flood wardens were, which is probably what Katie will say. So I'll actually try to ensure that those properties were resilient and protected, but Katie may want to come back on that as well.
Katie?
Yeah, so we do have, I'll bring this up in my report, we had the business figures, the grants went out after the February flooding, but I think they were more on the emergency grant side, and the property, which allowed them to get back to, they could use the money to put more defences in, or further the defences, or repair after the February flooding. And I'm not aware of any other business property level resilience, but the household resilience grants are being administered at the moment. But it's one of the actions in my section of the plan, so I'll take that away for the community resilience group. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, folks, I don't see any other. Oh, sorry. Councillor Baker, James.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, no, just really, to echo some of the comments Councillor Baines and Councillor Patient have made, it is really heartening to see how well-practiced officers and all the partners are now when we have these events, kind of going out, walking around Hebdenbridge on the day and checking up on things, seeing all the drains being cleared beforehand, straight away the next day having the road sweepers come round, clearing roads and the debris, is starting to get a pretty well practiced and rehearsed machine. And I guess, near misses like this help keep us on our toes and be alert and resilient to it. And absolutely just to echo that point around, businesses where perhaps the business owner is unwell or able to get out and secure their property, then thinking about some mechanism to kind of help those and ensure that every business kind of has the same standard, because walking down the road on Market Street, it was a little bit variable in terms of the protection that different premises had. So just really to echo those points that they were previously well made.
Thank you. Councillor Caffrey, Peter.
Yeah, it's just about the reservoirs. I was interested that they dropped the level by, I think I heard, 10% prior to a lot of rain. I just wondered if it's possible to measure how much difference that makes. I mean, where's the level now compared to, is it 95 now or 90? Is it possible to measure how much actually doing that catches? Because that's quite significant, is 10% of a reservoir. So if it's working, it's obviously a good idea.
Do you want me to come back on that, Chair?
Granville, yes.
Yeah, so where we started with this, Councillor Caffrey, a few years back after the Boxing Day 15 floods, was that the Environment Agency carried out some flood modelling of the Hebden water catchment. And a part of that obviously was to help inform the future schemes that are being developed, obviously implemented by Hythenroyd and also developed for Hebden. But within that, they also looked at the potential impact that operating the reservoirs differently could have on flooding. And they looked at a range of scenarios and presented that information to us. And obviously what we did was then take that data away and just try and understand what the potential impacts could be in terms of water resources availability and drought risk. And that's really how we've ended up at this place where the 10% figure is a reasonable compromise between the two for that particular reservoir group. So there is evidence that shows the benefit, which is based off the Environment Agency flood modelling. They have also been doing some modelling to evaluate the impact, because we did have the 10% in place before Storm Kira last year. Obviously, that filled rapidly with the intensity of that storm, but we still think there probably was some benefit associated with the storage in the reservoirs. And I know there's an outstanding kind of request from scrutiny panel to report in a bit more detail on that particular issue. In terms of overall volume, 10% across that reservoir group amounts to about 840 million litres or 840,000 cubic metres. So it is a significant volume, but I think also, this is where we come back to needing to explore a range of different interventions, because the peak flows on the River Calder back in Boxing Day was something like 275 cubic metres per second, which would fill that storage up in less than an hour. So, there is evidence, modelled evidence, and I think both, also kind of probably observed evidence that suggests the reservoirs can provide a benefit. But it's also, continues to be one part of the jigsaw puzzle in terms of trying to mitigate flood risk, and they can't do it alone for Hebden. It's a part of a programme of work of other things as well.
No, the point I was making, that's a lot of water that could have been in the valley. So it does make a massive difference. I mean, I know you've got to manage drought and water availability as well, but without that, there'd been a lot more flooding, I suspect, would there? Without that drop of 10%.
Well, certainly the evidence from the Environment Agency shows that having the 10% in place does provide a flood benefit for certain. I mean, what I would also just reiterate, however, is that same modelling from the Environment Agency did also show that even if they're full, that nevertheless they do have a role to play in terms of reducing the pass of the peak flow down the catchment, because the large surface area of the reservoir, you've got to see a sort of quite a rise in that surface area across the whole area before you then see the water being passed on down. And I think, just in terms of the last couple of weeks, as I mentioned earlier, obviously it was the snow melt and the rapid thaw that's filled up the storage, and unfortunately wasn't there for Storm Christoph, although who said that wasn't as bad as could have been expected. But what may also be the case is that by storing that snow melt, actually they've helped to kind of keep the river levels a little bit lower through the rapid thaw.
Yeah.
So,
yeah, thank you. Thanks, Chair.
Thank you. I am struggling a bit to see people because we are having a power cut here. I won't bore you with the details, but it's a little dim and hard to see when people indicate. I wonder if people could just indicate in the chat if they want to come and comment. I think, Adrian, you might have indicated that you want to speak.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. I went with the traditional raised hand. It was just to add, I think, to some of the things that Granville have said, and to pick up on the comments from Councillor Caffrey. Yes, we do believe the reservoirs have a role to play in reducing flood risk, certainly for Hebdenbridge and downstream communities. It isn't straightforward how we quantify that. We try and talk about flood events in terms of a return period or probability, but even that is a simplification because there are different durations, as we've seen. Different intensities, but we are working hard to try and find a way forward with Yorkshire Water, and what I would say is Yorkshire Water as well are working hard to try and find a way forward. It just there are, I guess, a lot of considerations to take into account, and we're also working with DEFRA on some of those in terms of the water resources side and water supply side. But what we do hope is that we can find a long-term solution for utilising some of the storage capacity of the Hebdenbridge group, and we do believe that will have a meaningful benefit for the Hebdenbridge scheme and the Mythenroyd scheme as well. So we're really committed to try and make that happen.
Thank you. Neil, you wanted to come in with a comment?
Yeah, just a couple of quick comments. One, I think also to applaud the work of the wardens. I think the information that they put on the social media, particularly some of the videos, is invaluable really in being able to see how events are unfolding. So really grateful for that. The second point I wanted to make was I think reference to near misses is absolutely right. But also maybe just to mention that when we get these type of incidents, we get clearly a lot of surface water. We do still have to deal with quite a number of incidents of flooding which are happening kind of away from the towns up on the hillside and the like, where the the failing kind of infrastructure, the land drainage that we've got in the area, it's really put under pressure by these events. So there will be kind of some flooding events, some properties that have been flooded, but thankfully not on the scale that we've often encountered. Thank you.
Thank you, Neil. I can't see anybody else, and I think we've had a reasonably good roundup really in terms of the update. So just well done everybody, and well done the residents as well. I wonder if we could move on then to the formal part of the agenda. And I think item 4, we have to agree the minutes of the last meeting as a correct record. Does anybody want to propose the minutes? Scott, Councillor Patient, got any seconders? I'll second it as Stephen. Thank you. Okay. Next item, item 5, the Innovative Flood Resilience Programme, and I think is that you, Neil? We've had
yes,
the written
it is. Thank you, Chair, and apologies again that my video isn't working. I normally say that's a blessing, and I'm sure you'll all amplify that. Wanted to just give you some feedback on where we're up to with the flood resilience bid. If you recall, at the last meeting, we spent quite a bit of time talking around this subject, based on the information that we had at the time, and it was really only just starting to emerge what this might look like. But fundamentally, there was a sum of money, £150 million, that we would be able to bid from as lead local flood authorities, and there would be 25 awards made of that 150 million, with average allocations of the order of £6 million. Now, since the meeting, there was a lot of information that started to emerge from the Environment Agency's national team who were leading on this, and some really helpful workshops and webinars that they came forward. And what was very much evident from this was what they were looking to see were partnership bids, and that is partnership bids kind of at the higher level of local authorities, lead local flood authorities working together, but also working with the community groups on delivery, which of course in Calderdale we've got a good track record on that. The guidance also set out the activities that they expected to be covered in the application, and I've set out in the report what the 10 activities are. There was choices that had to be made from those, and certain activities, there had to be 2 of the 5 top activities that were in the table. Cut a long story short, we came together as the West Yorkshire Flood Risk Partnership, which is a long-established group of the 5 authorities that make up the area, along with the Combined Authority and Yorkshire Water. The group is, of course, chaired by Councillor Scullion. So I think a kind of desire to work together was something that I think we felt would be appreciated and probably put us into the strongest position of hopefully putting a successful bid forward. So we did that, and from some of the thinking that we've done in advance and relating it to the resilience actions that the guidance putting forward, we decided that we could have a lead on each of the areas. So leads, for example, led on integrated water management. In Calderdale, I put ourselves forward for nature-based solutions, which obviously includes a lot of natural flood management in there, which I think we're perhaps one of the specialists at. Bradford were leading on property flood resilience, Wakefield on enhanced local warning systems, and Kirklees on community volunteer approaches. And what we sort of tried to do really was to demonstrate how that kind of combined approach based on catchments is something that we could all work together on and learn across the area. So we're now in a position where the closing date is actually today. So I'm hoping that the board can really sanction the fact that we work together in this partnership manner to support that bid that's going in. I've not seen the final figures, those are being worked on up to the 11th hour, but we'll probably stretch the 6 million average allocation, I think, based on the argument that we are quite a sizable region, and maybe put a bid in for sort of the 8 to 9 million, and hopefully we can be successful at this expression of interest stage. If so, we'd expect to hear in about a month or so whether we were successful, and then we'd have the opportunity to build up an outline business case through the spring, with potentially work starting in the summer of this year. So we kind of get the bid in today, and then fingers crossed we sit back and wait, and hopefully we'll be selected to go forward to the next stage. Thank you, Jen.
Thank you, Neil. It's really looking like a very, very good bid, and I think working together with West Yorkshire partners is something that I think will stand us in good stead and being considered for a successful award. Are there any questions to Neil on the paper or in terms of the comments?
Chair, it's Paul Swales, Environment Agency. Just wanted to put on record thanks to my colleagues Mark Wilkinson and Sally Kellin, who I think have been working tirelessly on this bid for West Yorkshire.
And the committee gives their thanks as well, actually. Yes, fingers crossed for the success of this bid, and report to the next meeting. Scott, Councillor Patient.
Thank you. Yeah, I mean, obviously, thanks to everyone that was involved. I think it's really important that we've taken a regional response to this bid, and we really focus on what we're good at here in Calderdale, which is very much, you know, we're known for our natural flood management, and, you know, a lot of the groups that are well known nationally, Slow the Flow, Tree Responsibility, Moors for the Future, that are doing some really interesting work in and around the Calder Valley and beyond. So I think it was a genius stroke to do that combined approach, really, and really focus on the things that are special for here. And I think ultimately it'll bolster our chances for getting this, because it ultimately is a bid at the end of the day. It's not a fait accompli that we're going to get that money. So I think anything we can do more strategically to embolden what that bid looks like is important. And I feel like we've got the balance right. They've spoken to all the stakeholders. They've done some really good consultation throughout this. So yeah, just to add my extra thanks there as well, Chair.
Thank you. Committee happy to send this on its way and endorse it? Yep, I'm seeing a few nodding heads. Thank you. And fingers crossed. If we go on to item 6, natural flood management, and we have a presentation now. Is that you, Neil?
Hi, Councillor Scully. No, it's me. I'm
It's
Ben
Ben.
Fenton. I am the Natural Flood Management Project Officer. I'm just going to share my screen with you all. Can you see that?
Yes.
Yep.
Super. So like I said, I am Ben Fenton. I'm the Natural Flood Management Project Officer, and I'm working in the flood team with Neil at the council. We've not gone on to presenting mode. Sorry, there we go. That's better. So the Landowner Grant Scheme was introduced following the 2015 floods. As part of the DEFRA funding, Calderdale allocated £500,000 for this grant scheme, which landowners applied into to implement NFM on their own land. The scheme is managed by the council with support from the Environment Agency, Yorkshire Water and the Woodland Trust. 27 schemes are being funded so far, of which 16 landowners have completed their schemes, and there's a further 9 which are close to completion. And the average grant which is given to a landowner is around £15,000. So some examples of the work that has been done. We've done a lot of these attenuation basins. Now you can see one of the largest ones we've done, and this is an old mill pond which has been transformed into attenuation basin. Please know when you see these pictures, they're usually taken when the project is just complete, so they're all bare soil, but they'll all grass over in no time. They're all seeded up once complete, so they'll grass over and they'll look a lot more attractive and they'll settle into the landscape. This photo is Shoe Broad Dam, which some of you may be aware of. But there's a range of different sized attenuation basins. A really small one on the left to another large one on the right, which has been specially made for this. It's not been retrospectively. It's not a transformed mill pond like the other one was. We've also done lots of tree planting. Almost 10,000 trees have been planted. And the benefits of tree planting, I'm sure you'll all know this already, but it increases the roughness of the ground, which slows down overland water, overland flow. Also, it allows for increased infiltration and then uptake of groundwater as well, water. Additionally, stabilising the soil as well, which is very important in our valley. Also, 309 leaky dams have been done. This one on the photo is, let me lower that. There we go. You can see it. This one on the photo is made out of willow. So these willow sticks will grow as well, which has encouraged additional benefits. Other things funded include woodland management, which allow light into the woodland and encourage ground flora to stabilise the slopes, and as well as slow overland flow, and several other measures as well. Now, the process we go through with the landowner grants is the landowner submits an application to the scheme, and we conduct a desk-based suitability study. Following that, the applications are scored, and the highest scored ones are site visited, and their suitability for NFM is further looked at. Following that, we have a botanical survey to ensure we protect the biodiversity, and maybe further studies might be further surveys might be necessary there, fungi or perhaps birds. There's also an archaeological screening that happens, and then another screening by the flood risk manager. The grants are awarded, and then the landowner is free to implement the project, and that could be managed by the landowner themselves, an engineer, or perhaps a project manager, which is all funded as part of the scheme. Payment is only made when the scheme is complete and to the required standard. The grants may also include, I've mentioned the engineers, but they might also include interpretation boards such as this one in the photograph. Additionally, all the grants include 2 years of maintenance afterwards, which is really necessary for this type of work. I'm sure many of you will know there are many other benefits to natural flood management, including biodiversity, reduce soil erosion as well, and reduce nutrient losses. There's many benefits for climate change, and they're aesthetically pleasing as well, which is really important. The photo on the right shows 2 large attenuation basins in the center of the picture, and you can see that they're pretty much disappearing into the landscape. There is also some improvement to water quality made as well by natural flood management. So as you can see, there's plenty of other benefits to doing this, not just flood mitigation. So this is a success story. Now, this one's not actually funded by the grant scheme, but it was funded by another grant scheme, the Repair and Renew grant scheme. But it's very similar to many of the projects, and it's a really good example. Now, the 5 properties which you can see, I think there's a few more than 5, but the 5 properties were flooded in 2012 and 2015 in that row of houses on the left-hand side of the picture. So the homeowners pooled their grants and they created this attenuation basin. And the budget was £25,000. And since the scheme was completed in 2016, there's not been another flooding incident there. So this just shows that NFM can be used to mitigate local flooding, such as these properties flooding, in addition to the cumulative impact across the whole catchment. So the next steps. The scheme's not currently open to applicants due to the availability of funding, but we've been preparing for this by working with Slow the Flow to engage with landowners. And we've engaged over 65 landowners so far, and they're keen to do natural flood management on their land. We've started doing botanical surveys already. These have to be done within the months of April to September. So we did approximately 50 last year, and we plan to do the next 50 starting in April. And that creates a pipeline of projects. So that as soon as we get funding, we'll be ready to go with the next round of schemes. So now we're on the hunt for funding. Some potential funding sources. Neil's already mentioned the Innovative Resilience Programme. We have put in there for an annual round of landowner grant schemes. And also we can hope to expand on the work we've done to Kirklees as well. Other options for funding include the West Yorkshire Combined Authority proposal for £6 million. And we would be interested in a portion of that, which has been allocated for NFM, to do another landowner grant scheme or several rounds of. There's also the Flood and Coastal Committee and local levy money, which we're looking at as well. So this map is in development at the present time. So this shows, this is being developed by the Environment Agency, but it kind of shows the range of natural flood management schemes going on across Calderdale, of which the landowner grant scheme only forms a small portion of. So we've got all the large scale upland schemes, which you'll know about, happening on the moors, delivered by Moors for the Future, and such as the works delivered at Gorpley by Yorkshire Water and the National Trust. And then there's all the work that's been delivered by the community action groups. For example, Slow the Flow in Hardcastle Crags, and all the tree planting done by Tree Sponsibility. This map will be available to the public in the near future once it's been completed. There's several more bubbles to add to that picture as well. So as you can see, there's a wide range of things happening. So in conclusion, The landowner, well, NFM in general, offers great value for money. This photo shows a simple leaky dam which has been done. It's just some natural stone which has been dumped into a small gully, and as you can see, in rainfall it just really slows down the water, and you can imagine the cost of that is quite nominal for the amount of benefits that are given. That also could be done in wood as well, as we've seen in previous photos. So excellent value for money and a wealth of additional benefits which I've covered as well. As we can see by the number of landowners coming forward, the landowners are really keen to offer their land for NFM measures. And now we have a pipeline ready of schemes ready to go as soon as we can secure additional funding. Thank you very much. That was me. That's my email there if you wish to know more, benjamin.fenton@calderdale.gov.uk. Thank you.
Thank you, Ben. That was really, really interesting. I wonder if you could stop sharing your screen.
I will do, yes. As soon as I can work out how to do that. Here we go.
Thank you. I've got Granville coming in next.
Brilliant. Thanks, Chair. And I mean, a massive thanks to Ben for that presentation. Hopefully that was really useful to the Partnership Board in terms of kind of seeing what we're doing in terms of the NFM agenda within the Valley, some of the schemes that have been delivered. And I think, you know, I just wanted to make a particular thanks to Ben himself. I mean, Ben's been in post for, I think I'm right in saying, Ben, it's about 15-ish months now. And he has really, really pushed, you know, this agenda forward, and in particular pushed, I think, these projects forward. I think it's fair to say that the process for getting these projects through has not always been straightforward. There has been a lot of learning, I think, you know, through ourselves and also with the council and Neil's team in terms of how we deal with, you know, sort of squaring the circle, I suppose, of trying to get approvals in place and consents in place where through a system that was originally designed maybe for more traditional types of work. And, you know, I think we've now got to a place, hopefully, where we've kind of got that knowledge and understanding is much better embedded, and we're much more kind of confident in working through that approvals process. I think, you know, also worth recognising the effort that some of the partners within the NFM operational group put into developing the grant scheme in the first place. And I think I'm probably not wide of the mark if I describe it as possibly even a unique scheme nationally in terms of the way that has worked. And, you know, as Ben says, if we can look to kind of make best use of that scheme elsewhere, you know, across into Kirklees and in other places, and actually help share the knowledge and what we've learned in Calderdale with other communities to help them protect themselves as well. I think, you know, Ben talked there about the number of interventions and the volumes of storage that we've done to date. And whilst, you know, perhaps at the catchment scale, some of that looks relatively small in terms of overall attenuation volume, I think, you know, once we start to sum this up across the catchment as a whole, hopefully we'll begin to see the benefits of that cumulative impact. But I think we should also recognise, you know, the really local benefits that can be provided by some of these schemes. And, you know, that relatively small attenuation pond that is now protecting 5 properties may not have much of an impact at a catchment scale, but for the people who live in those properties, you know, that makes a massive difference. And I think, you know, finally, just as, you know, Ben's mentioned, funding for taking this forward is absolutely key. You know, hopefully we are successful with the innovative resilience application that Neil's just talked through. And I think just an observation, really, you know, when I was looking at an advanced version of that application that was being made through the combined efforts of the 5 local authorities, one thing that really stood out to me was the amount of partnership funding that can potentially be leveraged for things like natural flood management and nature-based solutions in particular. You know, it was the one theme really that you know, the potential to leverage in that partnership funding is actually even more than the funding asked within the bid itself, because of the opportunities to bring in things like elms, the Northern Forest and Community Forest, Nature Fund for Climate, and all of these other things. So, you know, I think NFM is fantastic value for money for what it delivers, but when you layer in also the ability to get additional partnership funding for some of those multiple benefits, that makes it, you know, even more good value for money. And I think we do need to really make sure we find a way of unlocking further funding for this programme to take it even further forward. Thank you, Chair.
Anybody else on this presentation? Can I just echo the sorry, Adrian.
Yeah, sorry, I wasn't sure you could see
And
me,
Scott.
Chair. It was a very quick comment, really. I think funding was mentioned a few times, both by Ben and Granville. I was just scanning the papers. It was my understanding that as a board, we had allocated additional funding to NFM. However, and I think it might be included in the Calderdale Flood Action Plan line within our investment plan. However, because it isn't instantly clear, and we have a number of bids in terms of local levy and the Innovation Resilience Fund, I wonder whether next time we just seek to bring some clarity back on whether what that additional funding is that I believe we've allocated, and I guess the latest position on those other funding bids. Because I think if funding is now starting to become a limiting factor in delivery, which it hasn't previously, then I think we've got a decision to make as a board as to whether this is something we want to put more of the funding we have available into.
Thank you. I think that's a very helpful suggestion, and we'll put that on the agenda for next time in terms of just clarity about the previous funding pipeline, the current funding, and also just flag up the applications that we've got in and the potential partner sources of other monies that are being sought. Thank you. I think, Scott, you wanted to come in?
Yeah, thank you. Just briefly, Chair. I mean, I was wondering if there was an opportunity for the Adaptive Pathways money to provide further opportunities for NFM within Calderdale specifically. That might be something Adrian knows the answer to, or likely not, given the early nature of that. I guess the other thing was around maintenance, and we saw a story recently about civil engineering projects, not in Calderdale, thankfully, and where they're at in terms of life. In terms of NFM, have we done a mapping exercise yet about how we return to sites that we've done? I know that we're working with nature, but given the fast flowing nature of the water and what that does to specific areas, knocking out particular areas where there's, Ben mentioned the leaky dams there at certain sites with stones and stuff, and I think we all know that it'll just take a torrent to potentially knock out some of those spots. So have we thought about perhaps doing a mapping exercise or gathering some telemetry about revisiting some of those sites that may well need it?
Yes, Ben.
Thanks, Scott. Yes, so as part of the grant scheme, landowners are encouraged to monitor their own work as well, the stuff that's been done on that land. And we really like that to happen, especially with things like the attenuation basins. We really need them to keep an eye on how it's working. There might be adjustments that need to be made over the years after it's been installed. And that's kind of why the maintenance grant is there, for further adjustments to be made if necessary. The mapping exercise is a really good idea and something I'd like to look at further. And we have built in some money into the Innovative Fund to do water level monitoring, and I'd like to expand that out and do attenuation basin monitoring as well in the future. But at the current time, we're not currently revisiting them on a organised basis, but as and when are required, really. But I will look into that, and I think that's a really good suggestion for the future, Scott. So thank you very much.
Thanks a lot, Ben.
Thank you. Can I just finally say thank you, endorse the comments that have been made in the chat in terms of Ben and the team. I actually think it's fantastic in terms of 65 landowners actually engaged with this in the borough, and 9,970 trees so far, 309 leaky dams, etc. I think this is fantastic work, and it should be much more widely known. And I'm sort of looking at the comms folk, really, because I think a number of people in the Upper Valley particularly, but also lower down the catchment, be very interested to see those. And I think it may well incentivise other landowners to engage with the programme and to push forward for more funding. So thank you very much. Thank you, Ben. Okay, if we could move on then, please, to item 7, Environment Agency report. Is that Paul or Adrian?
That'll be Paul, Councillor. Thank you. So yeah, I'll just give a few snippets from the report that we put together. I suppose the biggest headline for me, and one that's particularly close to my heart, is prior to Christmas that the Mythenroyd scheme was deemed winter ready. So essentially better protecting 400 homes and businesses in the village, which is it's a phenomenal achievement, to be honest, since from where we were, or from the devastating flooding in Boxing Day 2015 to a project that is 98% complete in the space of 5 years is an unbelievable achievement for everyone involved, and we can also thank the community for their patience and understanding during the significant disruption that's happened over the time. But thankfully we're there. There's a few bits and pieces to finish off early this year, particularly around Brearley and the new bridge. There's some scour protection to be in place and some minor sort of property flood resilience work. But essentially, the scheme is there and it's in place. And I'm sure walking around the village, the residents will see a lot less disruption now. VBA have sort of really scaled down their activity because there isn't much to do at the moment. So that was the biggest headline for me, but also with regards to funding for Mythenroyd, we were successful, and we've had the sign off from Wicker for the £2 million from local growth deal. So that's essentially gone into the Mythenroyd budget, which frees up £2 million of DEFRA booster funding, which is going to be allocated. I think we've previously agreed that to the Brighouse scheme and the Brearley Bridge scour protection, which is great news. It's more funding into the wider Calderdale programme. And then the other bit, just before I move on from Mythenroyd, is that we're continuing working with the Department for Education on the added resilience for Burnley Road Academy. So the detailed design work is underway. We're hopeful for that to be complete in the next few weeks. And I think construction will start during the summer holidays, because that gives us a nice period to really get all the work completed. Whilst the school is not there and everyone's away. And just to reiterate, this is a flagship project as well, with working with the Department for Education. So it'll be Calderdale leading the way again. Just moving on, briefly, I'll touch on our Hebdenbridge. So early works are continuing in Hebdenbridge, certainly the CCTV surveys, ground investigation. And I understand that the remediation of the Adult Learning Centre will begin shortly. And I think there was a call this week about that with the community. And also the contractors, Bam Nuttall, have started using the existing Mythenroyd compound. So that's going to be their hub moving forward. So good efficiency there that we can utilise an existing compound, so less disruption to the community. Hebdenbridge, sorry, not Hebdenbridge, Erindon Hillside continuing to progress as well. The business case has now been approved, so they're now working on the full business case, hopeful to start this year. And I understand some further investigation work is required for Stubbing Home Road, which will assist in the detailed design. I think we've touched on reservoirs enough for now, but if there's any more questions, I'm sure we can answer those. And then there's just general good progress being made on all the other projects, like Park Road, Elland, but lots of work behind the scenes rather than actually on site. And Copley Village, Hebblebrook, Sorby Bridge, Brighouse, Walsden, you name it, they're all underway in one way, shape or form. And happy to take any questions. Thank you.
Questions for Paul on the report? Councillor Patient, and do you want to say anything about Mythenroyd?
Thank you, Chair. I mean, people have probably heard many of my comments about Mythenroyd over the years, so I won't over-egg it. Sorry, Katie, and Brearley and Ludden Foot must be mentioned within the Mythenroyd scheme. So yeah, I mean, definitely on behalf of all the residents, nice for there not to be any more vehicular disruption in and around the village. It definitely feels like it's returning to quote unquote normal in and around here. And yeah, snagging aside, it's quite incredible, really. I think initially seeing that scheme taking shape, knowing how the Environment Agency normally delivers flood schemes, they're normally at the end of sort of, well, they're hidden, aren't they? They're normally at the end of sort of very, very hidden away sort of coastal areas that are not subject to the kind of scrutiny that this scheme has been over the last 3 or 4 years. And I'm talking noses over walls and, you know, pictures being taken on a daily basis. It's quite extraordinary actually seeing it unfold, and at the end of it, it's really incredible. So thank you. I think we're there. Next stop, Hebdenbridge. So with my ward hat on, I just want to mention a query from a few residents who live at Streamside Fold, who are concerned about the protection that their particular area is given. And I just wondered, Paul specifically, just to go on record with this one, just if you had any words of reassurance for that area specifically. I know that they obviously, like everywhere else in the village, kept their feet dry this time around, and ditto last year as well. So any words you have on that would be greatly received. Thank you, Paul.
I do want to respond to that before I bring Katie in.
Okay, thanks. I'm not on mute, am I? No, thanks, Scott. Yeah, so on Streamside Fall, I think you touched on the key point really, is that we had a very significant event nearly a year ago now. I think it was the second highest on record in Mythenroyd and elsewhere in the Calder Valley. And from the evidence and from my understanding, albeit Streamside Fold actually was protected from the new defences. Very few properties in Streamside Fold flooded. All but I think a couple did, because there was a little bit of work that hadn't been completed. But I think that, I don't know, that proves to me that the flood defences that are around, pretty much surround Streamside Fold, are at a reasonable height to better protect those vulnerable, or that vulnerable community, because they're generally of the older generation, the bungalows, and the walls didn't overtop in that location. So and the flood defence scheme has been designed by what we call experts, and it's been designed using all the available historic data, hydrology, listened to residents, looked at anecdotal evidence, photos, you name it. It's gone through many hoops and experts to come up with the solution and to build the walls to the most appropriate height and most and what we can actually afford to do as well. Because we could always go higher, but clearly there's limitations on what we can do in and around the valley and how much the money will go. So yeah, from my perspective, I think they have a step change in their standard of protection, as does the whole of Mythenroyd, Brearley and Ludden Foot, and they were protected, or on the whole protected, from the recent February event, or the last year's February event. But that's not, I suppose, one final point, and just to make this reiterate, I guess, is that this scheme is to protect from Cragbrook and the River Calder. Will still be, and I guess there'll always be, that residual risk of surface water flooding, overland flooding that's coming from the hillside and from the dry side of defences. So we're certainly not eliminating flood risk. We're just reducing it from the river or fluvial aspect.
Thanks, Paul. But briefly, I think it's worth reflecting on the fact that when this scheme was in its infancy, people were very, very mindful about it not being a scheme of uber high walls and that would change the very fabric of what the village looks like. Obviously, Mythenroyd steeped in history, literary, and just the very fabric of the place. So I think it's getting the right balance, isn't it, between that flood protection and maintaining what heritage the village has at its very, very core. And I feel like you've got that right. So thank you, Paul.
Thank you. Katie, and then on to Adrian.
Thank you. Mine's really quick, Paul. Just on the booklets that residents at Luddenham Foot are waiting for, is it to describe their flood resilience measures, who's responsible for them, when the contracts and things end with the equipment that they've got, just a chaser for that, please.
Yep, we're well underway with that, actually, Katie. We've had 2 internal meetings trying to sort of agree the wording with we're calling it an information pack rather than an agreement, right? But yeah, it's underway, and it will be distributed to all residents, businesses, or landowners that have a flood defence within their property boundary. Or so that's walls, certainly for Tillotson Home, and then all the property flood resilience measures as well. So there'll be guarantees in there from the property level resilience, property flood resilience company that we've used. So there'll be all that in there. So it's in hand.
Great, thanks very much. Thank you.
Thank you, Katie. Adrian, you wanted to come back on funding here.
Yeah, it was just a quick comment, Chair, and I think we have touched on this a number of times, but clearly as a partnership, we have quite a significant programme of delivery within the Calder Valley. We've, in terms of the programme now, it's over £100 million of funding that we've secured. The comment I wanted to make was Paul made reference to some local growth funding that we've attracted for Mythenroyd, which had initially been earmarked for Brighouse. And the point was this, really, that the partnership funding model that we use for the Environment Agency funding has lots of benefits, but is also, it introduces a lot of challenges, particularly on a scheme-by-scheme basis, particularly when lots of partners want to link their funding to specific outcomes in a specific location. And that isn't actually that helpful when it comes to looking at a catchment scale and wanting to achieve outcomes across a catchment. So we're incredibly fortunate, I think, that we have that additional booster funding from DEFRA, which actually does ask for outcomes at a catchment level and gives us that flexibility. And I think we're also incredibly lucky that we've got a partner in Wicker who are happy to work with us and recognise the flexibility that we have. So long may that continue. I just wanted to bring that up because even though I've done it before, I think it was worth mentioning.
Thank you. I don't see anybody else. Can I thank Paul and the team very much for that presentation. It does feel like we're coming to closure on some of these schemes, and others are really already well embedded at the planning and design stage. So, we are moving forward. And I know the Environment Agency always say, as Paul has just said, we've done this at the speed of light. Clearly, residents do not necessarily always believe that, but I am assured that in terms of the normal years of designing before shovel is put into ground, that this is actually a project which has gone really remarkably swiftly, given the circumstances and the weather and the events during the 5-year period. So thank you all. Okay, we'll move on to the highlight reports then. I think, Katie, yours is the first one.
Thank you, Chair. Yep, so it's mainly as read, and some of the stuff we've already covered during the course of this meeting. The sort of priority action things that we've been looking at were as previous: the health, the mental health, and the emergency planning. And some of the other actions will come into play in the next quarter when some of the reporting starts again, and we'll bring some of the other actions back in. I'm thinking after this last potential event and the event in February, that the transport actions and comms out to the community for the transport and need to really come up. They're not mentioned in that report. They probably need to come back into more of a focus in the next reporting, as we're seeing rail infrastructure over this last event, not just in the usual spot, but we had Sorby Bridge affected this time, which is a sort of relatively new one for that. So I guess people are not expecting the rail network to be affected at Sorby Bridge. And then we've got the usual road at Callis Bridge in the usual spot. So we'll bring that back in the next round of reporting. We touched on the flood grants, and we wanted to just highlight the recent updates on the household resilience grants that are well in progress now. It's taken a little while, and it's been a bit frustrating to the community in that grant process, and I think it's been hampered by COVID, unfortunately. There was 307 applications for the household grant, and but 201 of those had received the grant after 2015. So that is the tricky bit, where some of those will be revisited, sort of extenuating circumstances, but it is led by DEFRA, and they will ultimately make the decision on that. 23 of those have been approved already, which equates to, you see the figure there, 112,050. 10 have already been paid out of that, which is a small amount, but it is almost half of the ones that have been approved. The process is slightly more streamlined this time, in that the flood surveyor is appointed by the council, and is then makes it easier for the resident. They don't have to then decide who they're going to use and do all that initiation. So that part of the process is easier. So we gather those updates from housing at every community resilience meeting. So we'll have further updates on that in the next meeting. But on the whole, I think the people that have needed them are accessing them at the moment, and there's been lots of comms around that. Also, the deadline's been extended, and I don't have that to hand right this second, but I can update you with that. I think it's, if I'm right, was May next year for getting yourself registered for that grant, but I will confirm that. So it has been extended. Then the business grants, that is the same figure that was given last time, because those grants went out immediately after the February flooding out to businesses after February 2020. So that remains unchanged. We've talked about the emergency planning side of it, the COVID virtual hubs, which obviously is a new thing this year after COVID. And as I mentioned before, a bit more comms around that, offline comms mainly around that. With the mental health stuff, as you can see on the report there, it's all had to move to Zoom meetings just due to COVID, really. So they've had a dropout on there of generally of people that don't access those online facilities, which is a shame. And they've been offered support through calls of community cares in accessing people that that are on the COVID list as vulnerable, and have been able to actually capture some of those people through that partnership, working with the community teams. Health recommendations continues to be on this report, and it also goes through flood scrutiny as well. And I will continue to try and get those updates back from those health recommendations that came through scrutiny, because I think we've been lucky enough not to have an event this time, but if we'd had an event this time, those recommendations in that report need to be revisited. We need to make sure that they're accurate, that they're ready in place for a flood event. So I will keep going with that. And then we talked about property resilience grants. We'll continue with checking through the business as usual actions as these flood events and potential events become closer together, just checking that those business as usual actions are actually happening, and that everything is in place if we have a flood event. So apart from giving thanks for everything that happened over last week and the partnership working and the amazing flood wardens, and I will mention that I was on a webinar the other day. Caroline Douglas, who's Director of Incident Management and Resilience at the Environment Agency, during her webinar gave a really nice comment about flood wardens in the Calder Valley, about how just how valuable they are for the community in conveying risk and alerting the community, but working together with partners as well on various different levels. And she shared that comment as an example, and I just thought that was very nice of her to say on the national webinar that I was sitting on last week. So thank you.
Thank you, Katie. And you're being very modest there as one of the flood wardens, and some of that work that was being congratulated is your own. Thank you. Thank you very much. Questions for Katie? No, that was a very comprehensive report. Thank you. Okay, we move on to item 8.2. That's report, I think that's you, Granville, isn't it? Natural flood management.
Thanks, Chair. I mean, to be honest, I can probably be really, really brief with this because we've had a substantive agenda item on natural flood management and the programme that's been delivered to date, the progress that we've made, and the kind of forward ask, I think, primarily kind of around funding and next activities. So, I mean, unless there are any other specific questions from the board around natural flood management, I think Ben's earlier presentation probably really nicely captured where we are with it, you know, and a bit of an update. I don't have anything else to add in terms of the report itself.
Any questions for Granville that weren't covered before?
Katie just put her hand up.
Katie.
Sorry, just a really quick one. This is on reservoir management and communications. As you're already aware, people ask and are asking continuously about the reservoir management, how it works, when it happens, how you actually do that lowering, when you do that lowering. And I just wondered whether, as part of the flood partnership flood newsletter that comes out, that there is a regular update on there about whether you've been able to maintain those levels, challenges, any updates on that. I just thought that that is one question that I get asked an awful lot about the reservoir management, and then obviously I check with you, and we obviously get updates on the board. But it would be good if there was something on the newsletter that it reinforces that that confidence, doesn't it, for people that something is happening, and they're not reading something historic from one of the papers or from the papers from this meeting, that there is something current going on in the newsletter. It was just a point. Thank you.
Thank you, Katie. And I would like to, perhaps, Granville, if you just hold that, because actually under resilient infrastructure, the fourth report under item 8, I wonder if we could just come back briefly to reservoirs and an update on that. So if we could hold that, but you noted that point from Katie. Thank you. Okay, can we quickly move on to 8.3, which is communications? Is that you, Lucy?
It is, thank you. Yes, I'll be brief as well. So by exception, there are three, oh, apologies. That was bound to happen, wasn't it? There are three things I was going to mention. The first is I'm delighted to say that we've recruited a replacement for our flooding campaigns officer. You may remember a year ago almost, Heather Pritchard moved into a different role within the communications team. She's kindly been supporting us over the past few months. However, we have now appointed Lauren Barber, who is attending here. I'm sure you'll get to know her a lot better over the next few months. It's a job share, so we'll also be having Janine Ratcliffe joining us too, and I believe she'll be joining next week. So hopefully we can get both of them to attend the next board meeting so that they become familiar faces to you all. Secondly, I was going to mention, obviously we've covered Storm Christoph in quite a lot of detail. I was going to report, we've done an analysis and an evaluation of the communications that we've done. I won't give you a blow-by-blow account. I'll share, Lauren's prepared it and we'll share it with the board. I'll email it to Kirsty, I think it's probably the best way. Overall, we saw a great deal of media coverage across the whole partnership. I think Councillor Patience even made it to BBC Breakfast. We also had Radio 2, Radio 5 Live, Calendar Look North, Yorkshire Post, and of course the Courier as well. So really pleased with the level of interest that's remaining, because it's really helpful to, although it's an awful thing to live through, it does raise the profile of what's happening locally, which is useful at a national level. Social media engagement again was good, as was the visitor numbers from I am Calderdale as well. People are still using it as that trusted voice. They do refer to it throughout an incident, which is great. And then lastly is the Stormcare Anniversary. We've been in touch with partners. It obviously needs to be a collective response. So we're looking at media, social media, and trying to give an update on what's been achieved in the past year, but also looking ahead, linking it quite strongly with climate change messages too. So more on that over the next few weeks. So those are the key things that I was going to mention at this meeting, unless there are any questions.
Thank you. Any questions for Lucy? Not seeing anyone. I want to thank Councillor Patient for his hard work on the media. Every time I switched on my television, he popped up talking about Calderdale and climate change. So thank you very much for that. And I noticed that Lucy said, and even BBC Breakfast, as though you weren't really usually seen first thing in the morning.
Let's not mention a bobble hat.
Yes, your famous bobble hat on windswept bridges in Wytham Ride. Thank you for that, seriously. Okay, I'm going to move on to item, no questions. I'm going to move on to item 8.4, which is the Resilient Infrastructure Report. And I want to take this opportunity, as well as saying welcome to Lauren. Look forward to working with you and with Janine when she starts. Also to say welcome to Sheila O'Neill, who is the new director of regeneration, and she's replacing, well, some of you will remember Mark Thompson and then Mark Cole, who's been interim director. So welcome to your first flooding meeting, Sheila. I'm afraid there are going to be one or two more coming up over the next few months as you get to understand the importance of flooding in Calderdale in terms of shaping what we do, but also the extraordinary good work that's already happened around the challenge of flooding and water management in Calderdale. So I'm not sure who from, is it Neil, are you going to deal with? I don't think Stephen Lee is here. I'm not sure who's actually going to speak to this report first.
Yes, it's myself, Councillor Scullion. I'll pick this one up. And maybe I'll just say at the outset, I know we've got Mark from the Canal and River Trust and Toby from Network Rail on the call in the meeting. So if maybe at the end of my report they want to add anything, I think that will be well received as well. I think just giving you the headlines from the report in terms of the work that the council's been doing, and I think, as we always say, it's probably sometimes not the most exciting part of the report. We're not building nice big flood defences. This is more about recovery and repair. From the council's point of view, you know, we need to produce Section 19 reports when we have major events. Thankfully, the events are the last week, mean we don't need to do one for that. It's not actually defined when you do one. I think it's really left to LLFAs to determine when it should be, when there's been significant flooding in an area. We've got a couple on the go. The one from Stormcare last year, which is progressing well. We've now got the hydrometric analysis back on that one, and we're just starting to go through that with the consultants who prepared that for us. We've still got our Achilles heel from the 16th of March 2019, This one has just got a little bit caught up with staff having to be diverted onto other tasks while we've been managing flooding situations. But we have been making progress on it. We've done a review of the hydrometric analysis on that. We should get a draft report out to consult with our colleagues in the other flood risk management authorities very, very shortly now. Still hoping that by the next meeting we can really report that one back to the board. In terms of investigations, the numbers remain high. Looking at the numbers though, we're probably looking at you know, a couple a day coming in, and these investigations, they're not, sometimes they're a quick fix, but more often than not, given the land drainage we've got and our knowledge of that historical infrastructure being quite vague, we do have to do quite intensive, extensive investigations in those locations, which do take time. Probably maybe the main piece of item, I think, looking at the work that the Environment Agency have done on the recovery works from Stormcare was the very delicate and difficult work at Shade Chapel, where the chapel has now been removed. Very difficult operation where we're trying to ensure that the chapel itself didn't collapse into the river and create flooding for the properties in the area. Whilst the contractors needed to work in a very difficult situation, almost tunnelling underneath the chapel at times to put some temporary defences in there. So I think a credit to the Environment Agency for the work that's been carried out there. And then in the report there's other various elements of work that's been carried on there. So I say those are probably the main items. I mentioned Yorkshire Water and the work that we've been doing with them as well. I think it's been really positive in terms of partnership working, the contribution that Yorkshire Water are making into the Hebdenbridge flood alleviation scheme, which was touched on area. And what we've been trying to do with the council is to sort of build on the partnership working that we've historically had, and looking at models, for example, of what's been happening in Hull under the Living with Water arrangement, and really trying to get on top of those. As I say, building on what we've got, which have always been good relationships, but I think looking again to see how we can improve those and how we can kind of better those working relationships alongside the Environment Agency as well. I'll say no more at that point, but maybe invite Mark, who I know from the CRT again, they've been working particularly with the Environment Agency on a lot of the major schemes, and Toby to come in at this point.
Right, thank you. I'm going to ask Mark to come in a moment, and then Toby, and Network Rail issues, particularly Wolston, are dear to all our hearts. And then I'm going to ask Holly Lynch MP to come in, because I know that this has been, and we'll return perhaps to the reservoirs discussion. Mark, anything from Canals and Rivers Trust?
Thank you, Chair. Very little to report this time. I think I definitely agree with others in this meeting that it was a near miss last week. I've been involved on the Manchester side and I've seen the impacts, and it was significant. Within the valley itself, I've had no reports of any damage so far to date. I know we're now inspecting everything since the events last week, and all works are continuing as planned with our normal winter stoppage programme and anything else arising.
Right, thank you, Mark. On to Toby. Toby.
Good morning, Chairs. Good morning, Board. Can you hear me? Sorry. Wasn't too
yes, you're a little faint, Toby, so if you could speak up, that would be helpful.
Yeah. Good morning, Board. Good morning, Chair. I'm Toby from Network Rails. Regarding the works of Wolston, obviously we're working with Neil and EA on sort of developing some solutions in terms of a railway flooding sort of resilience in the area. At the moment, I think that there's models being built regarding that area, regarding that catchment. It's in hand and it's getting developed by Arab and McDonnell. Other than that, I think I've got nothing else to report really. So,
thank you. I think I caught most of that things are in hand. Workers and you're working with McDonald on those issues, and there's nothing additional to report at the moment. I wonder if I could bring Holly Lynch in now and come back to the Katie's question that was posed earlier in terms of reservoirs, and just look at that in terms of the whole infrastructure questions. Holly.
Thank you very much, Chair. And yeah, Granville might be able to offer some more in terms of communications around reservoirs. But yeah, thank you, Katie. It was just an opportunity to update the board about the meeting that I had with Minister Powell from DEFRA earlier this week, that Robin Tuddenham, Granville from Yorkshire Water, and Richard and Adrian Gill from the Environment Agency all attended. For those of us that have been following the reservoirs issue for the last few years now, we'll be aware that there is a bit of a challenge in terms of all the legislation and regulation that underpins the work of water companies is very much weighted towards mitigating drought risk and not flood risk. I've tried a number of different ways to approach this with government with a 10-minute rule bill. I tabled an amendment to the Environment Bill asking government to go away and think about this and come back with their own proposals. I think since the last meeting that was rejected by government at the committee stage of the Environment Bill. However, Minister Powell did agree to a meeting with us to discuss this further. I think it was very clear to us that government is not minded to propose primary legislation to address this. However, they were open to working with us to try and find solutions. And we all certainly commend the proactive work of Yorkshire Water and the Environment Agency on this, but it is clear that we would need some central government consideration about the solutions in the long term to make this a more routine arrangement rather than just a pilot. So I think we all came away thinking that we would take up that opportunity to engage further with DEFRA, that there may be things that we can explore in a bit more detail, but we did get a sense that the door was open to do some of that work. And I think, Granville, you were working on putting some detail on the bones of some of that over the next few days and weeks at some of your workshopping opportunities.
Come in there,
Thank
Chair.
you. Granville.
Yeah. So just to build on what Holly said there, yeah, very useful meeting in terms of sort of elevating the risk of this issue. Again at DEFRA, and as Holly says, the need to have that support from kind of EA National and DEFRA and government to help progress this alongside all of the work that we're doing more locally with the Environment Agency and other partners. Just to build a little bit on the workshop that Holly alluded to, the Environment Agency and DEFRA have been running a project over the past couple of months to look in more detail at some of the legislative and regulatory barriers that there are to use of reservoirs more proactively for flood. And I've actually got a meeting with the consultant who's doing that project with the Environment Agency this afternoon to start to look through some of the preliminary outputs from that work and understand hopefully how we can also help to shape that project going forward. Interestingly, United Utilities, Northumbrian and Severn Trent Water will also be on that call. So, that is very much trying to look at these issues kind of holistically across the piece. But obviously, from my perspective, I'll be very much kind of trying to play into the learning that we've got from the Hebden trial in the past few years and what we understand some of the limitations and issues are. Just on the comms issue, Chair, if I may, while I'm on, thanks to Katie for the kind of comment and question earlier. I suggest to take that one away, and I'll do some work with. I can do some work, with the new kind of guys at Calderdale Comms and with our own comms team about what we want to do about that. I think maybe just one observation is whether it's a regular update. Obviously, we're only running the trial for the period December through to March, so we maybe just want to think about how that messaging works at different times of the year, whether it's during a period where we're running a trial like we are this year, or if it's a more general update about some of the other stuff that we've just talked about in terms of that future piece, and working at a national level to try and resolve some of the knottier issues.
Thank you. And I would absolutely reinforce what Katie said. It is the kind of discussion of the day, really. Lots of people, I think there are a number of myths going round about the reservoirs not being let down, or the reservoirs equally contributing to the volumes of water in the river channels, because the reservoirs have been let down at an appropriate moment. So it'd be good to actually quell some of those rumours and get some.
If I could just make one more observation there, I think, yes. Which is, I think it's also important that we get the communication around the reservoirs into the context of the communication about everything else that's also being done. And I do have a slight reservation that focusing communication on the reservoirs alone is only going to increase the expectation about what can be done with the reservoirs. and we all know that they can, they can play a bit of a part at Hebden in particular, and we know that, but they are not the panacea to every flood problem within the valley. And I think we just need to be careful about how we shape that that regular update, whatever it might look like, to get that right balance.
I think we would all agree with that, actually, and we have been round these communications challenges before, really, over the last 5 years, and as the Environment Agency know, in terms of just getting the right information out at the right time in the right language. But yes, thank you for that reminder. Anything else to add on the resilient infrastructure report? Questions? Okay, thank you very much. Comes on to item 9, Yorkshire Regional Flood and Coastal Committee update, and that's myself. I actually have nothing to update that's particularly relevant for Calderdale, which hasn't already been covered in this meeting, actually. So happy to take any questions to take back to that Regional Flooding Committee, and of course Adrian is here, who also attends that. Adrian, there isn't anything urgent for Calderdale that I've missed reporting on? No,
I don't believe so, other than because we've covered a lot in the meeting, Chair, so I don't think so.
Thank you. Item 10, question time, questions from the members of the public. Have we got any, Kirsty?
No questions received, Chair, but I did think you may have wanted to speak on the last item.
Sorry, I beg your pardon, I missed that.
I think Granville did raise his hand for the last item.
Granville.
All right, thanks. Thank you, Kirsty. I was just going to pop a message in the chat. It was a very small RFCC related update. I think we talked the other week, didn't we, Chair, that I was going to attend the Yorkshire RFCC meeting to talk about reservoirs and flood risk. Obviously, that was unfortunately bumped from the agenda item last week because of the anticipated flooding within the region and the fact that a number of officers were otherwise occupied. So I think that item will now be at the April RFCC meeting. And obviously we can provide an update on what we're doing in Calderdale and the broader picture. And I'm also expecting to go to the national chairs of RFCCs in February, again, to talk about the same issue, joining up again with some other companies and regions who are also looking at this kind of issue, but more in the context of potential opportunities with new reservoirs, which is not something we're looking at within our region, but it's very much on the national agenda, where new reservoirs are potentially being planned. What role can they play also in attenuating flood risk?
Thank you, Granville. Yes, it was a shorter than usual meeting because it was taking place at a time when we were fearing there might be a major flooding event. Unfortunately, that was averted. Okay, I think that's as finished on the agenda. I think we've had a good meeting in terms of going through some of the issues and a wide range of coverage. And I really want to thank the partners and indeed the council officers really for everything that you've been doing. Really, I think we are seeing some fruits of the work that has been done. Thank you all very much. Bye for now.